Hi everyone. Today we're going to take a look at what happens when we have angles that are not acute. So taking specifically a look at obtuse angles between 90 and 180. So first of all, let's take a look at values of sine when we put it into our calculator. And remember, we're going to round to 4 decimal places in general for ratios. So a 20-degree angle, again, using our calculators, has a sine ratio of 0.0349. Plugging into our calculators, sine 50, 0.7660. Sine 80 is 0.9848. Sine 160, so getting into our obtuse angles, 0.0349, sine 130, 0.7660, and sine 100, 0.9848. Now noticing that we have equal sine ratios in each of these cases. Looking then at the relationship between the angles, well, 80 and 100, 50 and 130, 20 and 160, all of those angles add up to 180. And remember that we talked about angles that add up to 180 are called supplementary. So we notice that supplementary angles have the same sine ratios. And again, supplementary means that they add to 180 degrees. So we can see that if we were to choose 5 and 175, 2 and 188, 55 and 125, all of those would have the same sine ratio. Well, taking a look at, do we see that same pattern for cosine and tangent? Well, the cosine of a 20-degree angle is 0.9397. The cosine for a 160-degree angle is negative 0.9397. A cosine of a 50-degree angle is 0.6428. For 130 degrees, it's negative 0.6428. And we notice the same for the cosine of 80, which is 0.1736, and 100 is negative 1.736. So we do have the same values for our supplementary angles, but the positives are for angles that are acute. We have negatives for angles that are obtuse. And we see that the same case for tangent, that if we plug into our calculators tan 20, we get 0.3640. For tan 160, we get negative 0.3640. Tan 50, 1.1918. Tan 130, negative 1.1918. And same relationship for our supplementary angles for tangent. Okay, so again, supplementary angles, value is the same, just different signs. So looking at our conclusions, the sine of A is equal to the sine of the supplementary angle, or 180 minus A. For cos and tangent, they are equal, but with the opposite sign. So cos A is equal to the negative cos of the angle that is subtracted from 180. And same thing with tan. So that is because of the signs of our ratios. So sine is positive, cos is positive and tan is positive in the first quadrant. Remember, this is called quadrant 1. And in quadrant 2, we have sine is positive, cos is negative, and tan is negative. So keeping in mind what quadrant of our grid these angles would fall in will tell us what our sine, cos, and tan ratios will be. So the fourth point we want to say here is when angle A is between 0 degrees and 180 degrees, and sine A is a positive value, that tells us that there are two solutions for that sine. So there are two angles or two values for angle A. There is the acute one, what our calculator will always give us, and there is also another one which we have to keep in mind for 180 minus angle A. Okay, so that's kind of the basis of this lesson, is that if we have a triangle, sometimes there are two possibilities for sine, the acute and the obtuse. So looking at some examples, without using your calculator, state whether each value will be positive or negative. So cosine of 50, and remember any angle that is less than 90 is going to have a positive ratio. So we would have a positive cosine ratio for 50. Tan of 100, we are going to have a negative value for tan. It's greater than 90, less than 180. Sine 175, remember in the second quadrant or obtuse angles, the only one that is positive is sine. Tan of 15 is in the first quadrant, so it's got to be positive. Cos of 93 is in the second quadrant, and the only one that is positive in the second quadrant is sine. So cos of 93 has to be a negative value. And you can check using your calculator to make sure that you've got the right answer there as well. Now, example number 2. First thing we want to do is find the sine of the angle. So sine of angle A, just punching into our calculator 40 sine or sine 40, we find that the sine of the angle is 0.6428. We also want to find angle B that has the same sine ratio. So angle B must be 180 minus 40 in order to have the same sine ratio. So angle B must be 140, and we can double check that in our calculators by punching in 140 sine, and we do verify that those have the same sine ratio. For angle A is 135. Again, the sine of angle A, punching that into our calculators, we get 0.7071. Angle B, in order to have the same sine ratio, has to be supplementary to 135. So angle B being 45 degrees, just verifying that we have to be right, we put the sine of 45 into our calculators, and we do in fact get 0.7071. Example number 3. Here's a question where we know that it can be an angle between 0 and 180, so it could be acute or obtuse, and we want to determine all the values of the angle. So cos of angle A is equal to 2/3. So we're going to put that into our calculators. We're going to do our inverse cos to find the angle. So cosine or inverse cosine, bracket 2 divided by 3 end bracket equals, and that tells us that angle A is equal to 48 degrees? Well, we know that cosine ratio is positive. The value here is positive, which means it has to be an acute angle. That makes sense. We don't have any other angles that would have a positive cosine in the second quadrant. Sine of angle A is equal to 7 over 8, so inverse sine bracket 7 divided by 8 tells us that angle A is going to be equal to 61 degrees. Well, we also, though, have a second possibility with an obtuse angle that also has a ratio of 7 over 8. So angle A could also be equal to 180 minus 61. So we have two possible values for that, 61 or 119. For part C, tan of angle A is 1 over 5. Again, thinking about tan is positive, it's going to be in the first quadrant. We don't have a positive tan in the second quadrant, so there is only one possible value here. So we do our inverse tan, bracket 1 over 5, and our angle must be 11 degrees. That's the only one. For part D, cos of angle A is negative 5 over 8. So we know automatically negative cosine means it's going to be an obtuse angle. And when we put this into our calculator, inverse cos, bracket negative 5 divided by 8 equals, we do in fact, rounding to the nearest degree, get an obtuse angle of 129 degrees. Part D, again, right away, positive sine. There are two possible answers for sine. There are two different angles, one obtuse, one acute. Our calculator's always going to give us the acute one. So inverse sine bracket 8 divided by 9 gives us an answer of 63 degrees. We also have to account for the other angle of 180 minus 63 or 117 degrees. Okay, so in a question like this, between 0 and 180, we are going to have two possible answers for sine. Otherwise, cos and tan, if they're positive, we know it's going to be acute, or cos or tan being negative, we know it's going to be obtuse. Okay, so questions to practice on your worksheet for today. Have a great day and a great